The Monday morning rush had already begun at Harrison Technologies in Atlanta, Georgia. Employees hurried through the glass doors carrying coffee cups, laptops, and stacks of paperwork. Among them was Daniel Brooks, a quiet single father who had worked for the company for 6 years. Daniel wasn't the kind of employee who demanded attention. He arrived early, stayed late when projects required it, and rarely complained. His biggest motivation was his 10-year-old daughter, Emily. Since becoming a single father, Daniel had learned to balance work with school UPS homework, grocery shopping, and bedtime routines. His job wasn't simply a career, it was the foundation of the life he had built for his daughter. For 6 years, Daniel had been one of the company's most reliable technology specialists. He had helped develop a software platform that became the backbone of Harrison Technologies' biggest client accounts, yet most executives barely knew his name. That morning, Daniel was called into the office of Sarah Mitchell, the company's operations manager. Sarah sat behind her large desk with a folder in front of her. Daniel closed the door. Daniel immediately sensed something was wrong. "Is there a problem with the project?" Sarah opened the folder. "We've decided to terminate your employment." Daniel stared at her. "Terminate, yes." He remained calm. "Can I ask why?" Sarah leaned back. "Your performance hasn't been impressive lately." Daniel knew that wasn't true. His latest project had been completed ahead of schedule, and his team had recently received praise from several clients. "I thought my department was meeting every target," he said. Sarah shrugged. Things change. Daniel looked at the paperwork. He thought about Emily's school expenses, their rent, and the medical bills he had been carefully managing. "Is there anything I can do to change your decision?" Sarah shook her head. "No. Your position has already been filled." Daniel slowly nodded. "All right." He didn't argue. He didn't threaten her. He simply returned to his desk and began packing his belongings. A few co-workers watched quietly. Some looked shocked because they knew how much Daniel had contributed to the company. One colleague whispered, "You don't deserve this." Daniel gave him a small smile. "Take care of yourself." As he walked through the office carrying his box, Sarah stepped into the hallway. "Well, that's done," she said to another manager with a satisfied smile. She seemed pleased with herself. "I finally got rid of the problem." Daniel heard her but kept walking outside the building. He sat in his car for several minutes. His eyes became wet, but he refused to break down. He pulled out his phone and called Emily. "Hey, sweetheart." "Hi, Dad. Are you coming to pick me up today?" Daniel smiled despite everything. "Yes." "I'll be there." He didn't tell her about the firing. Not yet inside the office. Sarah was already celebrating with co-workers. She had no idea that the company's owner was arriving the next morning, and he was about to ask one question that would turn everything upside down. Where is Daniel Brooks the next morning? Harrison Technologies was unusually busy. Senior executives had gathered for an important strategy meeting because the company's owner, Richard Hayes, was visiting headquarters for the first time in nearly a year. Richard was known for being demanding but fair. He had built the company from a small Atlanta startup into a major technology firm, and he knew the importance of the people behind its success. At exactly 9, Richard entered the executive conference room. He looked around the table before taking his seat. "Let's begin," he said. The chief financial officer opened his presentation, but Richard interrupted after only a few minutes. "Before we discuss the numbers, where is Daniel Brooks?" The room became silent. Sarah Mitchell looked confused. "Daniel, yes." Richard replied, "Where is he?" Sarah forced a smile. "I terminated his employment yesterday." Richard slowly put down his pen. "You did what he wasn't meeting expectations." Sarah explained. Richard stared at her. "Daniel designed the architecture behind our Atlas platform. He personally solved the security problem that nearly cost us our biggest client. You fired him." Sarah's confidence disappeared. "I wasn't aware he was that important." Richard shook his head. "That is exactly the problem." He immediately asked the CTO for a technical status report. Within minutes, the truth became clear. Daniel had been responsible for several critical systems that nobody else fully understood. Without his expertise, the company faced serious risks, including the possible loss of a major contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Richard stood. "Find him." An assistant located Daniel's personal contact information and called him. Daniel answered cautiously. "Hello, Mr. Brooks. This is Richard Hayes. I'd like to meet with you." Daniel hesitated. "I'm no longer employed there." "I know," Richard replied. and I want to apologize for that. Later that afternoon, Richard personally visited Daniel's home. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, helping Emily with her math homework. When Richard explained why he had come, Daniel listened quietly. "I want you back," Richard said, "but not in your old position." Daniel looked surprised. "I'd like you to become director of technology." Daniel considered the offer. "What about Sarah?" Richard didn't hesitate. "She will no longer have authority over your department." Daniel looked toward Emily. "I need a workplace where my time as a father is respected." Richard nodded. "You have my word." Daniel accepted the following Monday. Daniel returned to Harrison Technologies. This time, employees stood as he walked through the doors. Sarah was no longer celebrating his departure. She had been removed from management after an internal review revealed several poor leadership decisions. Daniel entered the executive conference room and took his new seat. Richard looked around the table. "Let this be a lesson. Never assume someone's value based on their title or position." Daniel smiled quietly. He had lost his job because someone thought he was replaceable. He returned as the person the company couldn't afford to lose.